Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Victoria O'Neill, a practitioner account manager here at Hifas Terra. And whilst we wait for everyone to trickle in, I just thought I'd like to thank everybody who managed to attend our founders talk about the reishi mushroom last Tuesday here in London. And a link to her talk will be available shortly for anyone who missed it. It was a fantastic talk and introducing the reishi mushroom to the world. It was beautiful and fantastic mushroom it is. I'd like to mention that we are introducing a series of webinars designed to help practitioners choose medicinal mushrooms in their protocols. Tonight, obviously, it's about diabetes. On the 7th of February, it will be about gut health, and on the 21st of February, cardiovascular health. All the webinars start at 6:30 and they last until about 7:15, with a chance to ask questions in the chat during the webinar. And of course, afterwards, if you wanted to email health@hifasterra.co.uk, then we can answer questions too. And a recording will be sent to you. All these webinars are free of charge, and we just would like to share our knowledge of the mushrooms with you. So if you're interested, please go to the website. Now I see that quite a few people have trickled in. So I think it's my great pleasure to introduce Romina Welmani tonight. She's a nutritional therapist and a mycologist. Romina's been with Hifas Terra UK since its beginning in 2015 and is a driving force in the expansion of its education programme. Diabetes in the UK is a growing problem, with the costs of treating the condition and its expensive complications to the NHS at around £14 billion a year. It's estimated that 4 million people in the UK suffer, and that number is rising. You probably have clients with this condition, and although it can be successfully managed for many with lifestyle changes, exercise, diet and supplements, we would like to introduce mycotherapy, the healing mushrooms, as an additional tool in your therapeutic toolbox. And here is Romina to talk you through how mycotherapy can be a valuable resource. Thank you.
Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to you this evening. Thank you, Victoria, for the introduction. Yes, really happy to be with all of you today. I thought I would just say a quick hello before we start our presentation. I just wanted to check that before we start, if your sound system is working correctly, and if it's not, then feel free to put it in the chat and someone will try to help you if you can't hear me right now. Or if it's not very clear. So I'm really excited to be with you here this evening. Feel free in the chat to drop in any questions that you may have during the webinar, and we will try to take them at the end of the session. So let us start with the presentation. Thank you. So medicinal mushrooms, and the cornerstone for supporting diabetes. In this specific presentation, the aim is to really understand how mycotherapy and mushrooms can actually be a holistic protocol that we could use to tackle not just diabetes 1, diabetes 2, but also all the issues linked to metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. As Victoria well said, I just wanted to check that I think my slides don't seem to be turning. So if you can just give me a second. I think it's a little bit of a technical glitch. Oh, can you see the next slide, all of you? Yes, lovely. I was only checking because the last time we had a tiny technical glitch, so just wanted to make sure we didn't have that same problem this time. Yes, so the webinar is focused on understanding mycotherapy. And before we try to understand what diabetes actually is and how it occurs in the body, I thought we would just present mycology and Hifas Terra very quickly to say that today, we've been around for over 25 years, and actually, as Victoria said, our founder was here last week, and she gave a presentation, and she brought with her an accumulation of the 20 years behind her. But even behind that is her father, who was a mycologist and who was researching these mushrooms 50 years prior in the West. So I think that the accumulation of that knowledge is very, very valuable in understanding mycotherapy. And I thought I would just quickly whiz through this slide, which you may have seen in some of the other sessions, but just to remember that there are over 150 different active principles within medicinal mushrooms that have been found. And so many of them are being researched on a daily basis by Western and Eastern scientists worldwide. Some of these compounds we will be looking at in particular in some of the mushrooms that help with insulin resistance, mainly different fractions of polysaccharides, enzymes, triterpenes, and ganoderic acids. So we will be looking at these a little bit more in detail shortly. Yes, so understanding diabetes 1 and diabetes 2. As Victoria well said, over 14 billion pounds are being spent by the NHS today just in tackling this problem. And whereas there's, 90% of the population, out of the 4 million actually have diabetes 2, but only a 10% has diabetes 1. But one thing we did notice was that it's a very important topic today for us, because if this number is growing, then understandably us as nutritional therapists in our practices, we will be having more and more people with not just diabetes, but all the consequences that lead to, the consequences of insulin resistance, which is all the metabolic syndrome diseases, including weight gain, high blood pressure, and other cardiovascular diseases. So I do think that it's a very important part of our understanding. So let's understand a little bit the difference between diabetes 1 and diabetes 2. I think all of us know that diabetes 1 is more of a genetic disease of the immune system, or rather it's an autoimmune disease, whereby the pancreatic beta cells actually are destroyed, and which leads to a lack of insulin levels. So in this scenario, we know that there's a diagnosis of an exacerbated immune system, and basically our immune system can no longer tell the difference between healthy cell tissues and antigens. And usually diabetic 1 patients are administered long-term treatment of insulin. So you have the rapid administration, which is usually given 3 times in a day, and then you have the long-term intermediate insulin injections that are given overnight to patients. Causes of diabetes 1. So a lot of the times, what has been noticed, and a lot of research has shown that diabetes 1 is sometimes due to viral infections that are being contracted. In fact, just earlier today, I found a study that showed that pregnant women who were diagnosed with specific enteroviruses were more likely to have children that were diagnosed consequently with diabetes 1. So an interesting one to watch out for. Vaccinations as well. We will be looking at a case study later of an 11-year-old boy that actually was vaccinated and then had the predisposition to become diabetic type 1. And then obviously the genetic predisposition is there, and other inflammatory reactions or cascades of the immune system could also trigger diabetes 1 in people. Diabetes 2 is slightly different, because we know that it actually occurs later in life, and usually the onset for diabetes 2 on an average occurs for the population that over 65 years old, basically. And it's actually not an autoimmune disease, but rather a metabolic disorder, which actually translates to elevated blood sugar levels, which consequently leads to insulin resistance. So usually if someone, if one of these 3 things or disorders occurs in the person, that actually leads, which is hypertension, lipid alterations, and weight gain, specifically in the stomach area, the visceral fat, then that's when insulin resistance usually occurs. Now, we know that the difference between 1 and 2 is that 1 is genetic and very difficult to reverse. But diabetes 2 is something that can definitely, as Victoria had mentioned before, can be tackled with lifestyle changes. And we're really hoping that mycotherapy here can be another protocol you can use to reduce this disorder. So let's understand a little bit insulin resistance. I know all of us are nutritional therapists, but to understand what is actually going on in a normal cell versus an insulin-resistant cell. So on the first graph, you can see here a healthy normal cell with all its insulin receptors functioning and allowing the cells the entry of glucose and insulin to pass through very normally. Whereas in the second graph, you can clearly see firstly that there's a downregulation of receptors. So if you see about 6 in the first graph, you're actually seeing just 2 functioning properly. And in this case is where we actually see cells becoming more resistant, which actually translates to more insulin, but less receptors to respond to the entry of glucose and insulin to pass through. And we actually see this, this kind of scenario of insulin-resistant cells in all parts of our bodies and our systems. You know, I'm not going to go into all the details of the different parts of the body, but you can definitely see here insulin resistance in the pancreas, in the liver, in the fat cells, and you can see the overabundance of the amount of insulin, which actually then makes cells more resistant to insulin. And here I thought we could look at a very specific study that I found in the Journal of Clinical Investigation. And you can clearly see how metabolic defect actually here leads to the development of hepatic steatosis, or fatty liver, as we call it. And you can directly see here a link between fatty liver and insulin resistance. So on the left, you can see a normal liver, and you can see on the right what happens in fatty liver. And basically, when lipolysis happens, which is induced in the adipocytes, there's a breakdown of fats, and which releases fatty acids, basically. And the accumulation or the variety of fatty acids actually contributes to fatty liver. And under such conditions, when there's a condition of insulin resistance, then we realize that the insulin actually does not adequately inhibit HSL, which is the hormone-sensitive lipase. And then what happens is that lipolysis is actually not suppressed. So you can clearly see how the triglycerides are being accumulated, and then there's a decrease of the oxidation, which then leads to insulin resistance. And here you can also see a very specific study that was done basically to understand the role of a very specific hormone called resistin, which is also linked to metabolic syndrome, obesity, and to diabetes. And as we were saying before, when the immune system is exacerbated, then that's what leads to autoimmune disease, and inflammation is definitely one of the primary causes of insulin resistance. So you can see here how when you have resistin, so that is a specific signaling molecule that is secreted in the adipocytes and called resistin, and which actually translates to a hormone that resists insulin. And in this particular study, what was noticed or observed was that resistant was lowered when the patient was given drugs and antibodies that lowered resistance, so anti-diabetic drugs and which in turn lowered the antibodies. And in this specific study, which was done on mice, by taking these anti-diabetic drugs, this specific hormone was reduced, and which actually translated to improving blood sugar levels in these mice, even if these mice were given a diet induced with diabetes. So a very interesting link between this hormone and insulin resistance, and in turn, increase of the inflammatory cascade. So now that we've had a quick idea understanding what is actually insulin resistance and how metabolic disorders is actually occurring, I wanted to just quickly look again at some of the key molecules present in medicinal mushrooms that could help with tackling this disorder. As I said before, we talked about some of the polysaccharides, and mainly beta-glucans. And we'll be looking at very specific fractions of these polysaccharides that are present in some of these medicinal mushrooms. We also can see here that a lot of the different minerals are present in medicinal mushrooms. So we can see iron, zinc, copper, but one of the key ones that we would be interested in when tackling diabetes is clearly chromium. And even if it's not written here, actually, a lot of the mushrooms actually do contain natural levels of chromium, which help to increase glucose absorption and metabolize glucose, basically. A lot of the B vitamins are present, and the essential amino acids as well. Tritopines and ganoderic acids, specifically ganoderic acid A, B, and C, are also very powerful in tackling or lowering insulin resistance. And I wanted to actually zoom into a very particular mushroom, which is going to be one of the stars of this evening, mainly due to its anti-glycemic properties, the Coprinus mushroom, or as we say in Latin, Coprinus comatus. And you can see here that some of the key properties and mechanisms of action of Coprinus are not just a hypoglycemic effect, but the ability to decrease weight and to control weight in particular, but also its capacity to reduce blood sugar levels, mainly due to a very specific compound in Coprinus called glucomannan, which is a dietary fiber, and we'll be looking at it very soon. But just to give you a highlight, Coprinus is one of the highest one of the mushrooms highest in beta-glucans from all the other mushrooms. So interesting to understand a little bit more the main properties. As you can see here, we have mainly vitamin C, D, B, E, and minerals. There are 20 essential amino acids in Coprinus, but there's also a very specific mineral or an organic complex called vanadium, which is outstanding for its anti-diabetic action. And basically, vanadium acts at two different levels if tackling diabetes. At the first level, it's acting on the pancreas, so it actually works at protecting and revitalizing the beta cells, the ones that are actually producing the insulin. And this is of special interest to us, specifically for type 1 diabetics, as we know, that actually have led to destruction of their beta cells. And at a cellular level, vanadium actually potentiates cell receptors of membranes, and that actually is what results in reducing insulin resistance. So mainly of interest to us for diabetes type 2 in this case. So a very powerful ingredient, I would say. Now it's very important to note that vanadium doesn't have any secondary effects, but when taken in conjunction with iron, could be competing because both are minerals, as we said. But if one is taking the vanadium contained naturally in Coprinus and taking iron at the same time, there has been shown no effects or any interactions, because in that case the vanadium is much higher when naturally occurring in Coprinus. So here we can see a very specific study done on mice that were fed with Coprinus, and that actually showed a partial recovery of their B pancreatic cells after 15 days of supplementation. And it's interesting to see that there was a very good improvement of glucose tolerance in these rats. Interesting study, but I would definitely recommend all of you to have a look at this. Now, another compound that is very interesting to look at is glucomannan, which is a very specific type of polysaccharide with B bonds. And glucomannan mainly has several properties, as you can see here, in not just reducing appetite, but also decreasing absorption of glucose and lipids, increasing cholesterol excretion, toxins, and improve peristalsis. So mainly glucomannan is very, very powerful in reducing glucose and triglyceride levels. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them on the chat. We have Victoria here with us who will be looking at replying to any questions you may have. So nopal is another ingredient that is not part of extracts within medicinal mushrooms, but I definitely wanted to have a look at it because some of our supplements, specifically I'm referring to mycocoprin, that specific supplement has added nopal, which is a very specific type of cactus extract added into that specific supplement. So you can see here how nopal contains high levels of minerals, naturally occurring chromium as well, very rich in fiber with very little fat. But mainly nopal helps in reducing, in helping with weight control, reducing triglyceride levels, and also regulating BP levels. Very interesting because it actually helps to activate endocrine functions, and specifically in the treatment of diabetes type 1 and diabetes type 2. Oh, sorry, I missed a slide. As I was saying before, Coprinus mushroom also contains naturally occurring chromium, a mineral, as we all may have studied and know about, that plays a major role in increasing insulin sensitivity, but also in having an anti-diabetic effect, not just for diabetes 1, but also diabetes 2. So it's obviously, a lot of people take chromium separately, but it would be interesting to see how Coprinus comatus mushroom already contains quite high amounts of chromium. We also know that chromium plays a major role in the metabolism of lipids, proteins, and carbohydrates. Now let's look at another mushroom that is also of interest to us for diabetes and insulin resistance, the maitake mushroom, or as we call it in Latin, Grifola frondosa. And maitake is been used in a lot of different protocols of ours, actually, here at Hifas at Terra, mainly not just for weight control, but also to regulate blood sugar levels, blood pressure, and also to improve lipid profile. So one of the main uses of maitake is its hypoglycemic effect and its anti-diabetic effect mainly. And this is mainly due to a very specific polysaccharide fraction in the maitake mushroom called sometimes the X fraction in scientific studies, or the X fraction of the mushroom, which actually increases glucose metabolism through the reduction of the resistance to insulin. So this is especially interesting for us in terms of tackling diabetes too. And mainly what this translates to is that maitake, or specifically the S fraction in maitake, favors the entry of glucose into cells, and it actually avoids transformation of glucose into fat through the liver. And I think that's a very important role that maitake can play for insulin resistance. It's interesting to see here, there's a very specific study that was done on that specific X fraction polysaccharide fraction. And it was done on mice, and basically showed that that by the intake of maitake, there was an observation of a decreased glucose in blood sugar levels, and a concentration of insulin, basically. We can also see basically that thanks to maitake, these mice were actually able to metabolize glucose. You can see here how there's a marked reduction in the glycemia of diabetic rats, but also maitake has the ability to increase the numbers of insulin receptors. So not just helping with insulin sensitivity, but also increasing the number of insulin receptors available to allow the entry of glucose and allow the entry of insulin. We also use maitake very, very frequently to tackle weight control, because mainly due to its effect to reduce fatty acid absorption. So if we have clients coming to us to control their weight, then definitely maitake will help with weight control, as it also helps to metabolize lipids. And here again, there was another study done by rats, some of them on diet with maitake, on the same diet, but a group taking maitake and a group not taking maitake. You can see here how the group that was actually taking maitake noticed there was an observation of almost 25% of reduction in weight. So a very important mushroom, not just metabolizing glucose, but also metabolizing lipids. Not sure how we're going for time. I think I'm kind of not much time left, I'm told. Okay. Last but not least, I'd like to quickly talk about the reishi mushroom, or as we call it, Ganoderma lucidum in Latin. Mainly due to its ability to reduce insulin resistance, but also because of its anti-inflammatory capacity. As we said, especially in diabetes 1, we're looking at autoimmune disease and an overactive immune system. So definitely using mushrooms that are anti-inflammatory or known for the anti-inflammatory effects is key also when using a protocol. So what I wanted to say about reishi before I get into the real case was the hypoglycemic effect of reishi is due to a specific polysaccharide, so the ganoderic acids A, B, and C, which not only increase insulin secretion, but also help to reduce insulin resistance and improve hepatic metabolism of glucose. So very interesting mushroom for tackling insulin resistance. So I'd like to talk to you here specifically about a case of a boy that was administered our mushrooms, a diabetic type 1 patient. Now it's important to understand, as we said before, type 1 is a life-threatening disease. So Unless someone is actually working directly with the endocrinologist of the patient, I wouldn't recommend dealing with a type 1 diabetic patient without working with one of those experts. But in this specific case of Lucas, who was 11 years old at that time, he was actually, our mycotherapist was working with his endocrinologist since he was 18 months. So there was a very close relationship between both, but there was a very close monitoring of this specific patient who was told to have insulin levels of 35 to 37 units that were in rapid administrations, so 3 dosages a day. And then overnight, he was using basically his levels were from 19 to 21 units of Lantus, which is a specific long-acting insulin analog. So I find this case very interesting because we were able to monitor it right from the beginning. But basically, he was administered our mycocoprin, which is our Coprinus mushroom extract, and he was given 500 milligrams 3 times, 3 capsules of 500 milligrams in combination with mycocell, which is the Agaricus blase mushroom. I know I didn't talk about it today in the session, but in many of our webinars and presentation, we've talked at length about this mushroom due to its anti-inflammatory and its ability to really tackle autoimmune disease. In fact, I would recommend you to go back to that specific webinar that we spoke about autoimmune. But so this specific patient was given 3 of the Coprinus extract and 3 of the mycosol extract before meals. And after 3 months of taking this protocol, you can see how his insulin levels decreased so significantly that his insulin administration in the day fell from 35-37 to 15 to 20 units. And the intermediate insulin injection that he was taking also fell considerably to 12 units of Lantus. After 6 months, you can see here how insulin levels have been dropped further from 3 to 5 and 5 to 6 of the Lantus. And then after a year, literally this diabetic patient one was only taking the mushrooms and wasn't taking any insulin shots whatsoever. Now, in this case, it's a very particular situation because if diabetes type 1 is actually diagnosed within 3 years and under, then actually there is a possibility to reverse diabetes 1. But in most cases, what would happen is a significant reduction in insulin resistance, even in diabetes type 1. So the reason I took this specific case rather than taking a diabetes 2 case is to show you how far the mushrooms can go in tackling even autoimmune diseases that seem irreversible. So before we go into the protocols, which I would like to tackle with all of you, I just want to talk quickly about Hifas Terra's extraction and cultivation processes, because I think that if we know that these type of chronic diseases are able to be supported and that are dose dependent, then it's very important to know that the specific active principles in these mushrooms need to be at a level that would help with supporting that specific chronic disease. And this is just a couple of pictures that we have at our headquarters of Hifas Terra back in Galicia, Spain, where we're just showing you a little bit how our cultivation process is done, basically. But basically here you can see how we are actually isolating specific myceliums of our mushrooms and the ones that have shown the highest potency. And we've been researching these mushroom strains for, as I said, over 20 years back at our farms and our laboratories, where we extract these specific strains, isolate them, and then start growing those mushroom strains. And even though supplementations are not required to, we have GMP certified laboratories, meaning we come to the same level as pharmaceutical grade and standards. And I would always watch out when buying any kind of supplement to look at the GMP certified seal. So not just the organic seal, but also the GMP certified, knowing that all of the active principles have been isolated, that the extraction process hasn't actually led to a loss of these active compounds, and that finally you are actually receiving the right dosage to support a chronic disorder. So I think we're kind of pressed for time here. I know we're 7:05 as I'm told. Now I just wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of dose dependent and extracts. It is so important to make sure when looking at extracts that we are reaching the right level of dosage to tackle the problem. As we saw in the case with the diabetes type 1 patient, the 11-year-old boy, we were giving 500 milligrams of extract and not powder. And that is very important because what we're doing in the extracts is that we're actually only extracting the active molecules and principles in these medicinal mushrooms and taking away the fiber from it. Of course, we want to use, as nutritional therapists, we like to use foods as whole foods, you know, so the fiber in the mushroom and contains a lot of different, minerals and vitamins that could be lost when doing an extract. But what we're looking at in a chronic pathology is that we want the extract of that active principle and the specific dosage that would reverse it. So here, for example, you can see that just to give you an idea of how much fresh mushroom is needed to finally obtain the organic extract. But we're actually using 150 kilos of fresh mushroom to obtain only 15 kilos of dehydrated mushroom powder. And that is then grounded, and the molecules are actually isolated, the active molecules. And finally, when that supplement is made into an extract, you have the equivalent of 1 kilo of extract. So it's just to give you an idea of how potent the extracts actually are. 500 milligrams of extract. I'm not good at math, but you do the math in how much would 500 milligrams of extract mean, and how much of fresh mushrooms such as shiitake, reishi, coprinus, and maitake we would need to actually produce this high potency extract. So I wanted to zoom in particularly to the coprinus supplementation that we have, which is a 6-to-1 ratio, which means 6 kilos of coprinus mushroom powder was used to only create 1 kilo of coprinus mushroom extract. And this is our main formula that contains the coprinus mushroom, but also the maitake mushroom that we looked at, as well as the sun mushroom that we didn't look at today, but as I mentioned before, that we're using for a lot of the immune and autoimmune conditions. So for diabetes 1, as we said before, we have to always closely work with the endocrinologist, but definitely never tell the patient or the client to stop taking their insulin shots, whether overnight or their daily administrations. But definitely, if you looked at the protocol here for diabetes 1 to support the symptoms of diabetes 1, we would definitely use the mycocoprin. You can see here that we would recommend taking 1 mycocoprin in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and 1 at night. And we also recommend taking the mycorrhea, which is our reishi mushroom extract, very high potency extract with a ratio of 15-to-1, meaning that 15 kilos of reishi powder was actually used to produce 1 kilo of reishi extract. Again, because of the anti-inflammatory action of reishi, as we saw before, but also the hypoglycemic effect of reishi, all the ganoderic acids A, B, and C. The ability to increase insulin secretion for the reishi is very powerful in this protocol. So we would recommend both the microcoprin and the micro ray, one of each, 3 times a day, preceded though by the ascorbat, which is our antioxidant complex. Again, taking 1 each 5 minutes before meals, and 5 minutes before the mushrooms. I would take the antioxidant complex, and helps to increase the absorption of the beta glucans and the polysaccharides in the mushrooms. And then I would take 1 of each 3 times a day. Yes. And for diabetes type 2, again, it's both the same supplements, the mycocoprin and the microray. Again, if you remember, we had said before that at a cellular level, for diabetes type 2, Coprinus mushroom is specifically acting to potentiate the cell receptors and to decrease insulin resistance. So we remember that the Coprinus mushroom contains high levels of vanadium, glucoman, and chromium that are helping to tackle and reduce insulin resistance. So again, in this case, I would take our antioxidant complex 3 times a day before meals, and wait 5 minutes to take 1 of the mycocoprin in the morning and 2 of the microrays in the morning, and then continue taking the mycocoprin. We would definitely recommend this protocol for at least 2 months. And once the situation has regulated, we would definitely say to, as a maintenance, to just start taking the mycocoprin and to remove the microray. But you can definitely ask one of our in-house practitioners and mycotherapists if you have any specific case of diabetes 1 or 2. Please feel free to get in touch with us. For metabolic syndrome, again, it's something that we had seen before. There was such a big link with metabolic defect and fatty liver, as we remember before. And in this case, we would definitely take the mycocoprin 3 times a day. Again, before that, we would take our antioxidant complex 3 times a day. And we would also take, in this case, the mycomix. We haven't looked at the mycomix before, but we definitely know the 3 mushrooms present in it: the maitake mushroom, the reishi mushroom, and the shiitake mushroom, all helping in their anti-diabetic effect, their ability to regulate and metabolize lipids, and to metabolize carbohydrates. So a very powerful combination for metabolic syndrome. So just reiterating that, we do need to stick to these dosages because we're looking at 500 milligrams of the extract capsules in each one of the capsules. And scientific studies are showing that for diabetes 1 and 2, you do need a minimum of 1.5 grams of active extracts to be able to support, which is why we have put 3 capsules of 500 milligrams that are very, very important. So I think we're running out of time, as I hear. I was just showing you, I was just wanting you to see some of the pictures of our headquarters in Galicia, because it's really a magical, beautiful place that if you can join us in some of our educational retreats that will be happening later this year, please feel free to. Victoria will give you more information later. And again, if you're interested in, and if you haven't signed up already with us, and you would like more one-to-one support on specific protocols, specific client case studies that you would like us to look at, we can explain you further the clinical application of these active compounds and how mycotherapy can help with that. So do feel free to email help@hifas@terra.com. So over to Victoria, if there are any questions or anything happening in the chat, Now is your moment.
Hello, that was a wonderful webinar. Thank you so much, Romina. It was very, very educational, and it was lovely to have those protocols at the end. There were just a couple of questions in the chat. I answered them in the chat. There was one about contraindications, and any other questions that you might have, just please email us through at health@hifasdeterra.com, and we'll answer them for you.
Yeah. So taking the question on contraindications, I think perhaps that question came in when I started talking about vanadium, but definitely vanadium, as I was saying before, is a mineral that could compete with iron if taken on its own, but naturally occurring vanadium that is present in the Coprinus mushroom actually does not have any contraindications. So for diabetics that are actually taking insulin injections, there are no contraindications or no secondary effects to taking the mushroom protocol. Do keep in mind we've actually have external laboratories that have tested that our specific mushrooms, due to their potency, their pure extracts and organically cultivated extracts, have shown no interactions with any medication, and actually don't interact with the CYP450 liver pathway, which is very reassuring for us as practitioners to know that there are no interactions even for diabetics, and that they could feel at ease taking it. The only thing I would say, especially as I said before, for diabetes type 1, is really to work with the endocrinologist. For diabetes 2, there is no issue whatsoever. The client can always monitor their insulin levels, and usually this is where the proof is in the pudding of looking at those as insulin levels, basically. The other question was anything more you could say on mushroom allergy. What I could say is that the only time we would discourage anyone from taking mushroom protocols would be if anyone had a mushroom sensitivity. But usually, in terms of mushroom allergy, what we found is that people are actually not allergic to the mushrooms as such, but they're probably allergic to some of the toxins present in non-organic mushrooms. So if, a lot of times people are growing mushrooms, not organically. So mushrooms act like sponges, and they're actually accumulating the toxins in them. And most people who have a reaction to it would be having a reaction to that specific toxin. Any issues with yeast overgrowth? Definitely not. In fact, we have a specific mushroom protocol for Candida, only because you cannot take medicinal mushrooms as the portobello mushrooms, etc. Especially when we're talking about the extracts that only have the active components that are isolates and don't have any of the fiber, and we actually have an anti-candida protocol for that. So James, if you want that protocol, do email in health@hifas.terra, and we'll be more than happy to send you that protocol, the anti-candida protocol with our mushrooms. Not sure if there are any other questions coming up, but I hope you enjoyed today's evening, and do feel free to even email us after this at health. And if you'd rather have a one-to-one call or consultation, then our mycotherapist will definitely help you with that. I wish all of you a lovely, lovely evening. Over to you, Victoria, if you wanted to say anything as a closing comment, maybe about the next webinars.
Yes, the next webinars will be on the 7th of February at 6:30, and it's entitled Feed the Inner You with Lion's Mane, and it will be all about your digestive and gut health, and how the lion's mane can help prepare the gut and help look after your microbiome. And on the 21st of February, we have a webinar on the healthy heart with medicinal mushrooms, looking at cardiovascular health and how the mushrooms can help with your protocols then. So if you're interested, please go onto the website, go to the events page and sign up. Thank you.
Also, I wanted to say, don't hesitate to experiment with the protocols, because I think that even experimenting on yourself as a practitioner, especially because we know that there is no interaction whatsoever with any medication, I would really encourage you to challenge you to try one of them on yourself. Earlier this month, we had our detox webinar, and we spoke at length again about maitake for weight control, but we also spoke a lot about reishi. And reishi is one of the key mushrooms, as I said, not just helping with insulin resistance, but we call it the mushroom of eternal youth, the mushroom to tackle anti-inflammation and aging, and we recommend it to anyone over 25 years old. So feel free to try them, because I know that a lot of you come to us saying that mycotherapy can be quite overwhelming and that there's so much information. But I think if we took one protocol at a time, or we took one disorder, one chronic disorder at a time, and see the effect of that specific mushroom, I think that would be very a great way to start off with mycotherapy. So thank you very much, and wish you a lovely, lovely evening. Bye for now.